My name is Eliana Brooks. I was 27 when I finally understood that sometimes a family can make you feel like a guest long before they ask you to leave. The first thing I noticed wasn't what anyone said. It was what they didn't. The hotel lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh coffee. My parents stood near the reception desk smiling as my sister laughed with her husband while their little boy chased the pattern in the marble floor. Suitcases rolled across the room. Phones flashed with vacation photos before the vacation had even begun. I reached for my reservation confirmation. The receptionist looked at her screen, frowned politely, then looked back at me. "I'm sorry, I don't see a room under your name." For a second, I thought she had made a mistake. Then my mother avoided my eyes. That tiny movement hurt more than any argument could have. My sister folded her arms with an expression I knew too well, the one she wore whenever she believed she'd already won. "Oh," she said with a little smile, almost amused. "Didn't Mom tell you?" Nobody answered. My father suddenly became fascinated with the hotel brochure in his hands. The silence grew heavy enough to hear the air conditioner humming above us. Finally, my sister shrugged. "We booked rooms for Mom, Dad, me, Daniel, and Noah." She paused just long enough for everyone to understand what came next. "You don't belong here anymore." No shouting. No anger. Just a sentence delivered as casually as someone commenting on the weather. I stared at her. Not because I couldn't understand the words, because part of me had expected anyone, to say she was joking. Nobody did. The realization arrived slowly, almost gently. There had never been a room for me. Not because they forgot. Because they had decided I wasn't part of the plan. I picked up my overnight bag before anyone could see my hands shaking. "I understand," I said quietly. My mother finally whispered my name. I smiled, not because I felt okay, but because I didn't want strangers watching my family fall apart in a hotel lobby. "I hope you all enjoy your vacation." Then I turned around and walked toward the sliding glass doors. No accusations. No tears. No dramatic goodbye. Just the sound of my suitcase wheels following behind me as the evening air met my face. I didn't know where I would sleep. I only knew I couldn't spend another minute begging for a place that should have been offered with love. Behind me, I heard someone call my name once. I kept walking. Sometimes the hardest step isn't leaving. It's accepting that you've already been left long before your feet begin to move. The automatic doors closed behind me with a soft hiss, and just like that, the noise of the lobby disappeared. The parking lot was almost empty, washed in the pale orange glow of streetlights. Families unloaded coolers and beach chairs, children laughed somewhere in the distance, and car doors slammed one after another. Life kept moving as if nothing had happened. I stood there with my suitcase beside me, trying to convince myself that I wasn't as alone as I felt. My phone buzzed once. Then again. A message from my mother appeared on the screen. "Please don't make this harder than it already is." I read it twice before locking the screen. Harder? I wondered, as if I had created this moment by simply expecting a room on a family vacation. I walked across the parking lot until I reached a quiet bench overlooking the water. The evening breeze carried the scent of salt and damp sand. Waves rolled in with steady patience, reminding me that some things never hurried, no matter how desperately people wanted answers. As I sat there, memories surfaced one by one, not dramatic moments, but small ones I had ignored for years. Birthdays where my sister chose the restaurant without asking me. Holiday photos where I somehow ended up at the edge of every picture. Family decisions that had already been made before anyone thought to call me. None of those moments seemed important on their own. Together, they formed a pattern I could no longer pretend not to see. Around midnight, I found a small 24-hour cafe a few streets from the hotel. I ordered the cheapest cup of tea on the menu, mostly because it gave me a warm place to sit. The elderly waitress noticed my suitcase, but didn't ask questions. She simply smiled, refilled my cup without charging me, and said, "Long days don't last forever." Those simple words nearly brought tears to my eyes. Hours passed quietly. My phone continued to vibrate across the table. Calls from Mom, then Dad. Even my sister called once, though she left no message. I wasn't ready to answer any of them. For For the first time in years, I realized that silence could protect me better than explanations ever had. Just before dawn, while searching online for a nearby motel, an unexpected notification appeared in my inbox. It was an email I hadn't thought about in months. The subject line read, "Regarding your grandmother's personal letter, to be opened when the family gathers." I froze. I had almost forgotten that my grandmother's attorney had promised to contact me when the time was right. As the first light of sunrise touched the cafe window, I slowly opened the message, unaware that within the next hour, my family's desperate phone calls would no longer be about a hotel room at all. For a long moment, I simply stared at the email. My finger hovered over the screen, unwilling to open it. My grandmother had been gone for nearly 3 years, yet seeing her name felt like hearing her gentle voice again. She had never rushed anyone. Even her silence had carried warmth. I tapped the message. Inside was a short note from the attorney explaining that my grandmother had left a handwritten letter with instructions that it be shared only after the entire family gathered for what she called a meaningful occasion. Since everyone had officially checked into the hotel that evening, the condition had been met. Attached was a scanned copy of the letter. The familiar loops of her handwriting blurred as my eyes filled with tears. "My dear family," it began. "If you are reading this together, I hope you remember that a family is measured not by who stands closest in photographs, but by who makes room for one another when life becomes inconvenient." I stopped reading. Those words settled over me like a blanket on a cold night. She couldn't have known what had happened just hours earlier, yet somehow it felt as though she had been sitting beside me in the hotel lobby, quietly witnessing everything. The letter continued with memories from our childhood. She wrote about how different each of us was, and how love wasn't something to divide into smaller pieces. It was something that grew whenever it was shared freely. Near the end, there was a paragraph addressed to me by name. "Eliana, if you ever feel unwanted, remember this. Being excluded says far more about the fears of others than it does about your worth. Never chase a seat at a table where your place must be defended. Build a life where kindness sets the table instead." I pressed my lips together, trying to steady my breathing. The cafe was waking up around me. Fresh coffee filled the air. Morning sunlight stretched across the wooden floor, and for the first time since leaving the hotel, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt seen. Then my phone rang again. "Dad." This time, I answered. His voice sounded strained, nothing like the calm man who had avoided my eyes the night before. "Eliana, where are you?" "I'm safe," I replied. There was a long pause. We need to talk." Before I could answer, another call came through from an unfamiliar number. It was the attorney. "I believe you've read your grandmother's letter," he said gently. "There's one more document she wanted you to receive, personally. I think it may explain why your family is suddenly trying so hard to reach you." I looked out the cafe window as the sun finally rose above the water. Whatever waited inside that second document, I knew it wasn't about money. It was about a truth someone had spent years trying to keep buried. The attorney suggested we meet that morning in a quiet office a few miles from the hotel. I arrived carrying the same overnight bag I had left with the night before. Somehow it felt lighter, even though nothing inside had changed. Maybe it was because I had stopped carrying the weight of trying to earn my family's approval. His office overlooked a small park where children chased pigeons across the grass. It was an ordinary view, comforting in its simplicity. He welcomed me with a kind smile and placed a sealed envelope on the table between us. "This isn't a legal surprise," he said. "Your grandmother wanted it delivered privately because she believed the timing would matter more than the contents." I nodded, my hands trembling slightly as I broke the seal. Inside was another handwritten note. "Families rarely break apart in one day," my grandmother had written. "They drift apart through small moments that nobody dares to question. If you're reading this, I hope you choose honesty over silence." Folded behind the note was something unexpected, a collection of letters she had written over several years, but never mailed. Each one described quiet moments she had witnessed. Times when I had been left out of family decisions. Times when she had gently spoken to my parents, encouraging them to treat both daughters with equal care. She never accused anyone. She simply recorded what she saw, hoping they would one day recognize the pattern themselves. The attorney spoke softly. Your grandmother asked me not to interfere while she was alive. She believed people have to change because they want to, not because they're forced. I sat in silence, realizing that someone had noticed all those years when I thought no one had. Just then, my phone lit up again. This time it wasn't a call. It was a family group message. My sister had written only a few words. Please come back. We need to talk. We're all waiting. A few seconds later, my mother added another message. We're sorry. We should have handled everything differently. I looked at the screen for a long time. Less than 12 hours earlier, there hadn't been room for me. Now, everyone suddenly wanted me there. I wasn't angry anymore. But I also knew that returning simply because they were asking would erase the lesson I had finally learned. Some conversations can only happen after people experience the silence they created themselves. I slipped the phone into my bag without replying. The attorney watched quietly before saying, whatever you decide, make sure it's a decision made from self-respect, not guilt. As I stepped outside, the morning sunlight felt warmer than it had the day before. For the first time in years, I realized I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking toward myself. And somewhere back at the hotel, they were beginning to understand the difference. I spent the rest of the morning walking along the shoreline. The tide had erased the footprints from the night before, and I found myself watching the waves with an unexpected sense of calm. It struck me how easily the sea let go of what it couldn't hold. I wondered if people could learn to do the same. When I finally looked at my phone again, I had nearly 30 missed calls. My mother had called the most. My father wasn't far behind. Even my brother-in-law, Daniel, had left 2 voice messages. That surprised me. He had always been quiet during family disagreements, the kind of person who looked uncomfortable whenever tension filled a room. Hearing from him felt different. I played his message first. Eliana, I don't know if you'll listen to this, but I think you deserve to know something. Last night wasn't supposed to happen the way it did. I assumed your room had been booked weeks ago. When I realized it hadn't, it was already too late. I should have spoken up sooner, and I'm sorry I didn't. His apology didn't erase what happened, but it sounded honest. Then I listened to my father's message. His voice cracked in places I had never heard before. I kept telling myself I'd fix it later, he admitted. I've been saying later for years. Last night, I realized there might not be another later if I lose you. I closed my eyes. Those words didn't magically heal old wounds, but they reached the place where excuses had always lived. This time, he wasn't making one. As the sun climbed higher, another message arrived, not from my parents, but from my sister. It was unusually short. Grandma's attorney came to the hotel this morning. He gave us copies of her letters. I read every one of them. A minute later, another message appeared. I thought she didn't notice how I always wanted to be first. I was wrong. There was no defense, no blame, no attempt to rewrite history, just a confession that sounded painfully unfamiliar. I sat on a weathered wooden bench overlooking the ocean and thought about all the years we had spent pretending everything was normal. Maybe the greatest distance between people isn't measured in miles. Maybe it's measured in the things everyone knows but no one is willing to say aloud. By early afternoon, my phone rang once more. This time it was my mother. When I answered, I didn't hear words right away. Only quiet breathing. Finally she whispered, "We're not asking you to come back because of the letter." Another pause. "We're asking because this morning we walked into the breakfast room and your chair was empty." Her voice trembled. "For the first time, we saw exactly what we'd been doing to you for years." I looked toward the endless horizon. There was still pain. There were still questions. But somewhere beyond both of them, I sensed something fragile beginning to grow. Not trust. Not yet. Just the possibility that truth, once spoken aloud, could change people in ways silence never could. Whether I returned to the hotel or not, one thing had already changed forever. They were no longer asking me to fit into the family they had created. They were finally beginning to ask how they had failed to make room for me in the first place. I didn't return to the hotel that afternoon. Instead, I sent my mother a single message. "If we're going to talk, It can't be in a lobby where everyone is pretending to be comfortable. Meet me somewhere quiet. An hour later, we found ourselves in a small public garden overlooking the water. There were no polished floors, no reception desk, no strangers passing by. Just wooden benches, flowering trees, and the steady sound of birds in the distance. My parents arrived first. My sister and Daniel followed a few minutes later, holding their son's hand. For a moment, no one spoke. It reminded me of the silence in the hotel lobby. But this silence felt different. It wasn't hiding the truth anymore. It was making space for it. My father was the first to sit down. "I've practiced what I wanted to say all morning," he admitted with a tired smile. "Now that you're here, none of those words seem good enough." "They don't have to be perfect," I said quietly. "They just have to be honest." He nodded. I kept choosing the easier conversation instead of the right one. Whenever your sister wanted things her way, I told myself it wasn't worth another argument. I didn't realize that every time I stayed quiet, you were paying the price for my comfort. His words settled between us. There was nothing I could argue with, because he wasn't asking to be forgiven. He was finally accepting responsibility. My mother wiped her eyes before speaking. "I told myself you were independent," she said. "I thought you needed less because you complained less." She looked down at her hands. "I confused your strength with the absence of pain." Those words reached deeper than any apology so far. For years I had wondered why no one noticed. Now I understood. They had mistaken my silence for happiness. Then my sister took a slow breath. "I've spent most of my life believing that if attention wasn't on me, I'd disappear." She laughed softly, though there was no joy in it. "So I kept reaching for more praise, more approval, more space." She looked directly at me. "I never realized I was taking that space from you. I thought I would feel victorious hearing those words. Instead, I felt strangely sad. Not because she admitted it. Because we had lost so many years before anyone was brave enough to say it." Daniel finally spoke. "After you left, Noah asked why Aunt Eliana wasn't staying with us." He smiled sadly. We couldn't answer him. Children, I realized, have a way of exposing the questions adults spend years avoiding. I looked at each of them in turn. "I didn't leave because of one hotel room," I said. "I left because that room reminded me of every moment I wasn't considered." No one interrupted. No one defended themselves. The wind stirred the leaves above us, and for the first time in years, our family sat together without pretending everything was fine. We weren't healed. We weren't finished. But the truth was finally sitting with us too. And somehow, that made the silence feel lighter than it ever had before. After our conversation in the garden, no one asked me to forgive them. That mattered more than I expected. There was no pressure to hug, no promises that everything would be different by tomorrow, no dramatic speeches about becoming the perfect family. We simply stood there for a while, watching Noah chase butterflies across the grass. His laughter floated through the afternoon, innocent and effortless. It reminded me that healing rarely arrives with grand announcements. Sometimes it begins with people choosing not to repeat the same mistake twice. My father cleared his throat. "The hotel still has one room available," he said quietly. "I already booked it this morning." He reached into his pocket and held out the key card. Then he stopped halfway. "If you decide not to stay, I understand." For the first time in years, he wasn't deciding for me. He was giving me a choice. I looked at the key card but didn't take it immediately. A small piece of plastic couldn't repair years of feeling overlooked. But the gesture wasn't really about the room. It was about finally making space without being asked. My sister stepped closer. "I've been thinking about Grandma's letters," she said. "She wrote that love isn't proven by words. It's proven by who feels welcome when they walk through the door." She gave a faint, embarrassed smile. "I don't think I've made you feel welcome in a long time." I nodded. "No," I answered honestly. "You haven't." The truth stung, but it didn't create another argument. It simply existed between us, waiting to be accepted. Later that evening, I decided to return to the hotel, not because anyone had begged me, but because I wanted to see whether anything had truly changed. As we entered the dining room together, I noticed something that made me pause. The seating arrangement was different. No one had claimed the best seats. No one had saved places in advance. My father looked around the table and smiled. "Where would you like to sit?" It was such a small question. Yet, I couldn't remember the last time anyone in my family had asked what I wanted before making a decision. I chose a chair near the window, where the fading sunlight reflected across the ocean. Conversation came slowly that evening. There were awkward pauses, uncertain smiles, and moments when nobody knew what to say. Strangely, those imperfect moments felt more genuine than years of pretending everything was fine. As dinner ended, Noah climbed into my lap and wrapped his little arms around me. "I missed you," he whispered. I hugged him tightly. Children don't measure love by old arguments or family history. They simply notice who is there. Looking around the table, I realized we weren't returning to the family we used to be. We were trying, carefully and imperfectly, to become one that finally had room for everyone. And somehow, that felt like the beginning, not the end, of our story. The vacation ended a few days later, but the real journey began after we returned home. I didn't expect weekly phone calls to erase years of silence. I didn't expect one honest conversation to rewrite every painful memory. Life doesn't work that way. Neither do families. What changed wasn't the past. It was what we chose to do with it. My mother started inviting me over, not out of obligation, but because she genuinely wanted to know how my week had been. Sometimes we talked for hours. Other times we simply shared tea in comfortable silence. There was no pressure to make up for lost time. We were learning each other again, one ordinary afternoon at a time. My father surprised me the most. One evening, he handed me a small wooden box that had belonged to my grandmother. Inside were old photographs, handwritten recipes, birthday cards, and a tiny silver compass she had carried for years. Folded beneath everything else was one final note in her familiar handwriting. "Home is not the place where you are always included. Home is the place where no one has to ask if there is room for them." I held that note for a long time. It explained something I had struggled to understand for years. I hadn't wanted a special room. I hadn't wanted to be treated better than anyone else. I had only wanted to know that someone had thought of me before I arrived. Months passed. Our family still disagreed sometimes. Old habits occasionally resurfaced. But now someone would gently say, "Let's make sure everyone has been heard." It became a quiet tradition. Not because my grandmother had written it, because we had finally learned why she had. One autumn afternoon, nearly a year after the vacation, we gathered again, this time at my parents' home. As everyone settled around the dining table, Noah ran through the house carrying place cards he had carefully written himself. He placed one in front of every chair. Then he stopped beside me with a proud smile. "I made yours first," he whispered. No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. My sister smiled at him, then looked at me. "I'm glad you're here." There was no hesitation in her voice. For the first time, I believed her. As the evening sun filtered through the windows, I looked around the table. The conversations overlapped, dishes were passed from hand to hand, and laughter rose naturally, not because everything was perfect, but because everyone finally belonged. I realized that the most meaningful justice had never been making my family feel the loneliness I once carried. It was watching them understand it and choose not to pass it on. Sometimes people ask me if leaving that hotel was the hardest thing I've ever done. It wasn't. The hardest part was believing I deserved a place without having to prove my worth. Walking away taught me that. Coming back taught my family the same lesson. And whenever I think of my grandmother, I remember her quiet wisdom. The strongest families are not the ones that never make mistakes. They're the ones who notice the empty chair and never allow it to stay empty again. Thank you for listening to my story. If there's one thing I learned, it's that you should never beg for a place in someone's life. The people who truly love you won't make you prove that you belong. Sometimes walking away isn't about giving up. It's about discovering your own worth. And when people choose to change, forgiveness becomes a gift, not an obligation. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need this reminder today. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away to find your own value? Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next story.